The makeup of this next parliament really, really matters. And there are some things that are bigger than Brexit, and the climate emergency is certainly one of them.
Caroline Lucas is the Green Party candidate in Brighton Pavilion, and formerly their only MP. We met up to discuss the newly made Remain alliance and if this really is the climate election.
Look at those cakes.
Oh my
Lovely.
Shall we have some coffee then, Caroline?
What I would love actually is an Oatly hot chocolate, if you could do one of them.
And I'm actually going to have a cup of tea because I had coffee on the way down. That's my head of it. Do you drink coffee?
I do. I just, hot chocolate just feels kind of comforting when it's kind of cold and there's lots going on, and it's a bit of a regression back to childlike times.
Yeah, absolutely. The Lib Dems they've been the biggest spenders on Facebook so far.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I can understand, obviously, she's a new party leader, people don't know her very well, so it's an opportunity to get her face out there and get her recognised. I mean, what do you think? What do you think how they're getting on so far?
Position of revoke at that point, I just felt this is just taking party interest above national interest to such I think, an unforgivable degree, to be honest. I think, if you wanted to send a message to 17.4 million people, but you don't give a fuck about what they just said, why don't you just say so?
Yeah, oh my God, that's going to be so bad. Oh my life, this is horrendous. Fuck. No, mate, no.
Sorry, that was cruel.
If this goes well,
it'll be amazing.
I'll be amazed. Fuck's sake. One time I did absolutely stack it, dropped it. It was the most embarrassing thing in the world. Caroline Lucas, hello.
Hello.
Thanks for taking the time to speak to us.
Thanks so much for coming.
It's a good day for you, isn't it? Remain Alliance, you're going to be running unopposed, well, without a Lib Dem opposition anyway, here in Brighton. Tell me about it. Is it good news for you? Happy?
Well, let me just set the context for it, because it's, it's not a cause for euphoria, because what we're having to do is basically game a horrible electoral system that basically doesn't allow people's votes to translate into seats. So we've regularly had situations, as you'll know, where you've got a government that's had 35% of the vote, but they get 55% of the seats. 1 million people voted Green in 2015, and we got one MP. I mean, I'm glad it was me, but nonetheless, it's not fair. So this is something that I think we've been driven to do, to try to ensure that we don't have either Remain candidates fighting each other and then Boris getting through the middle, or the Brexit party getting through the middle. I wish we could just change this voting system. It's been a long-held view, because not just because it's better for the Green Party, but because it's not surprising that so many people feel that their votes don't count, when literally 65% of the votes stacking up at the last election made no impact on the outcome, because they were already cast in seats where enough votes had got someone over the line under first past the post. I think the fact that we've got an electoral system that doesn't hear people's voices properly is at the bottom of an awful lot of the toxicity in our politics today. I mean, you could even make the case that maybe even the Brexit vote might not have happened in the way that it did if we'd had a voting system that along the way had listened to concerns of people who were worried about, greater inequality in the country, or the lack of power draining out of local communities, or just that sense that I've certainly felt as I've gone around the country talking to Leave communities, that their views don't count.
Are you pleased to be entering into this relationship, this alliance with the Liberal Democrats? Because obviously their Brexit position, if they get a majority, is still a big ask. But if they do, they're talking about revoking Article 50.
I am deeply opposed to this instant revocation policy. I think it's a kick in the teeth for 17.4 million people who voted to leave. I think that many people who voted to leave did so with good reason, because they were genuinely and legitimately feeling that the status quo in this country is intolerable. And if you look at levels of inequality around this country, it is intolerable, and people are right to say, hang on a minute, business as usual is not okay. And I worry that a revoke position basically risks turning the clock back 3.5 years and pretending those years didn't happen, going back to how things were before. And my bottom line is absolutely that we have to, those of us who are in favour of Remain, have to also add the words "and transform" in block capitals afterwards, because remaining isn't about going back to the way things were before. So to answer your question, clearly there are major policy differences between the Lib Dems and the Greens. I judge, and I don't think I'm alone in this, that the Lib Dems probably won't form the next government. So I think their instant revocation policy probably will not come to pass, but what they have said, and fair play to them, they have always been in favour until now of a people's vote, and I think that's a position they will continue. short of being in the position of being in government and introducing revocation.
If we were to redraw our party politics, more so than they already are, along these Remain, Leave lines, I mean, we're sort of getting into a territory where we could be sort of sectarianism almost, in the way if we realign our party politics like that along those two viewpoints, that could be actually quite damaging, couldn't it?
I think it's already happening to some extent, and it's interesting how so many more people now do define themselves around their position on the EU rather than on the left-right electoral spectrum. I think the left-right spectrum in a sense is also being overtaken by the fact that one thing I do take reassurance from, comfort from, is the fact that so many people say that climate, the environment, is going to be a massive thing for them in this election. 2/3 of people say that it's one of the key issues that they're going to be casting their vote on, and it really matters. And so to me, that sort of grey-green division that the Green Party has been on about for a long time, the parties that recognise that we live in a climate emergency and need to have policies that are commensurate with that to me is the dividing line I would like to see, because we've got to get that to be the key issue in this election. It's got to be the climate election.
I was going to say to you, a lot of people describing this as the Brexit election. Presumably you would disagree with them on that point.
I would disagree with them on that point. I was one of the 20 MPs who voted against having this general election, because I don't think a general election will solve Brexit. And what worries me is that in all of this conversation about Brexit, which it won't resolve, what does get pushed out is that overwhelming urgency of the climate question. And when you hear the Committee on Climate Change come and give evidence to Parliament and say literally that the next 18 months of the next Parliament are going to be crucial in terms of whether or not we start off on the path very fast that we need to be going on in order to get off this collision course that we're on with climate catastrophe, it just reminds you that the makeup of this next Parliament really, really matters. And there are some things that are bigger than Brexit, and the climate emergency is certainly one of them.
What would you do to try and remedy that course of action that we're on at the moment?
There are two important things. One is that I think that the Green New Deal that the Greens are espousing is more than a green industrial strategy. The Green New Deal, from our perspective, is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to fix an economic system that is not only driving environmental collapse, but is also driving inequality and insecurity. And is that combination, the idea that this is not just a technical solution to a technical problem, but this is absolutely about a transformation of our economy and the infrastructure of our societies, such that not only do we have a livable planet, but we also have people able to thrive on that livable planet.
Where's the money for it coming from?
Well, a lot of this is going to be capital investment, because it's going to be investing in those green technologies and transport systems and so forth. And when you've got government borrowing at such low levels as you do right now, then an awful lot of that will come from government borrowing. You say it's a lot of money, and yes, in one way it is, but if we're serious about the future of life on Earth, and I know that sounds like a very big thing to say over a hot chocolate in a cafe in Brighton, but if we are serious about what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is telling us, the IPCC saying that the next 10 years are going to be so instrumental in terms of whether or not we do have a livable planet into the future. It feels to me that, the word emergency means that you do something now. The word emergency is not the way that the government interprets it with its net zero plan for 2050. I mean, to my mind, that's the same as, dialing 999 and saying, can I have a fire engine in 30 years' time? If you're dialing 999, it's because there's an emergency now and you need action now. And we believe this is commensurate with that state of emergency.
Your remarks just earlier about the Green New Deal, and I assume that's a fairly pointed dig at the Labour Party, who have adopted their own Green Industrial Revolution. They've also adopted a 4-day working week, which is something the Green Party's talked about before. We can talk about who had it first. I mean, there are ideas that you've spoken about before, but if the fact of the matter is that they're adopting those policy positions, why should anyone vote for the Green Party if they could vote for the Labour Party, get the same policy, but the Labour Party has, not wanting to be rude, a more realistic chance of government?
Take it to me gently. That's all right. Because I think you need to ask the question, why is the Labour Party adopting these policies? And I would argue that it's obviously not solely because of the Green Party, but it is certainly because the Green Party is challenging them at ballot boxes up and down this country. Hundreds of councils are moving in that same direction. So I'm proud that the Greens, usually have been asking the questions for longer and therefore have arrived at the answers a bit quicker. So you need the Greens, I think, to be pushing Labour to hold their feet to the fire, to hold them to account, to make sure they deliver on this, and also to make sure that they don't sort of water down what the idea of a Green New Deal is. We had John McDonnell on the Mar programme just a few days ago, basically saying that, you know, although Labour doesn't quite have a policy on Heathrow yet, expanding some other regional airports might be a good idea because it saves people driving so far to get to the airport. That is a crazy argument, you know, not least because the emissions from aviation are far more damaging than the emissions from vehicles at ground level, and in any case we should be getting to the airports if we're going to airports by public transport, not by cars, and so on and so forth. So I think it's really important to have a party that is really clear about what is a Green New Deal, and to my mind one cannot be serious about a 2030 decarbonisation target and still imagine that we're going to be expanding airports, for example.
The Met Police were recently found, their ban on the Extinction Rebellion protests in London was recently found to be unlawful. Talk me through that, and also what you think that says about how seriously the establishment is taking climate change.
Well, I was one of the complainants alongside Jenny Jones, one of the Green Party peer, alongside Ellie Chowns, who's our candidate in the Midlands, and she was actually arrested for taking part in these protests. So we were really pleased to join forces because we just felt that to crack down on protest in such a draconian, all-inclusive way, because basically what the Met Police did was to put a ban on any protests anywhere in London. That was just such an overreaction to what was peaceful direct action. And it feels to me that we need to be defending our right to peaceful action, peaceful direct action. And if you don't defend it, then it gets chipped away. And so I wanted to stand up for this, not only because I believe that the role that Extinction Rebellion have played in pushing climate up the political agenda has been extraordinary and hugely impressive, but also for the next cause and the next cause, we need to make sure that we have that right of peaceful protest.
Do you think this is going to help the movement if those protesters who are arrested, and generally speaking, people, the tide may have turned a little bit on it, those people who are actually arrested might be getting compensation, the people who are made late for work might not?
That's always the case, isn't it, with direct action, in a sense of if you're not disrupting, then you're not achieving your ends. And I guess I would only repeat what the XR protesters themselves have said, which is that they regret it on a personal level. They're not obviously trying to make an individual's life harder, but when so many of the parliamentary processes to push this further up the agenda have not been as effective as they could and should have been, then if you're faced with something as dramatic as climate emergency and all of the all of the suffering that will come with that, then their action is commensurate with it. And in terms of the compensation, do you know what? I would imagine that most people will probably donate whatever they get back. I think it's the principle, not the idea that they're going to be making money out of it. I think they would donate that probably to XR or to other causes as well.
Caroline Lucas, thank you.
Thank you so much.